Hi everyone! Thank you so much for joining us today on YouTube Live as we discuss all of the things texturing and Mari. So as always with our YouTube Lives, this is really our chance to put the focus back on the artist and just step back and give them space to talk about their amazing work. So if you would love for us to keep doing more of these, please do like and subscribe so that I can persuade the marketing team to do more, and then we can all enjoy all of the artists talking. So before we jump in today, let's just start by introducing ourselves. I am Charlie. I am lucky enough to be the product manager of Mari, which means I get to spend all of my time working with the incredible team behind your favorite texturing application. And it also means I get to spend a lot of time chatting to the users of Mari, you guys. And this is my amazing co-host for today, who I will let introduce herself.
Hi, so I'm Ellie. I'm currently a senior texture artist at ILM, and hopefully I'll be able to speak a little bit about my texturing process for the Sky Goddess today and answer some questions.
Yeah, so we're gonna start by watching a pre-recorded version of Ellie's workflow. She's put a lot of time and effort into showcasing how she made the Sky Goddess, and I'm sure all of you have seen it. It is absolutely gorgeous. So we'll both be in the chat. If you do want to come and hang out with us, please do. Please do pop your questions in the chat at any point whilst you think of them. We will see you all in the Q&A.
Hi, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Ellie Dupont, and I'm going to talk about my asset creation process for the Sky Goddess project, the release of Mari 7, and also share a few tips and tricks from my texture workflow. Firstly, to introduce myself, I'm currently a senior texture artist at ILM London. Prior to this, I was a lead texture artist at Framestore. I have over 12 years experience in texturing for film and TV. I also have worked as a university lecturer in visual effects. Over my career, I have focused largely on character asset creation. Recent projects have included The Marvels, Star Wars Andor Season 2, Wonka, and Doctor Strange and the Madness of the Multiverse. I was delighted to collaborate with the team at the Foundry on this current project. The brief for the project was to create a new hero asset to represent Mari the software. The asset would be used for the splash screen, amongst other marketing material. The team at the Foundry really wanted to be able to capture the essence of power, efficiency, and creativity in this asset. I was given an array of compositional, mood, and lighting suggestions, which gave me a clear sense of direction for the project from the get-go. In general, though, the brief was really quite open and fluid, which is a fabulous thing to be confronted with as an artist. Following the brief, my initial idea explorations were around these given themes of power, efficiency, and creativity. I decided that I wanted to encapsulate efficiency and creativity in the development of the asset itself, but power was that aspect that I really wanted to focus on as the overarching theme of the piece. As those of you that follow my work might know, I do tend to focus on female characters in my personal work, so I knew that this piece would also be a female character. There are different reasons that I tend to focus on the female form in my own work, but largely it's because I'm female, and as an artist myself, I tend to represent my inner experience. So I was really interested in this relationship between femininity and power, and how to represent power in the female form. And I wanted to explore what power meant to me as a woman myself. From that, I had my key ideas for my final image. In order to translate my initial ideas into a visual development process, I tend usually to start with mind mapping. I use this technique to jot down rough ideas of the general themes and how I might start exploring that visually as a first step. As you can see here for the Sky Goddess asset, what started to come out of this mind mapping process was this idea of the character as a landscape for texture. Once I have a general sense of the direction of my character, the next thing that I will do is begin to develop a huge collection of references for that character or asset. very quickly, it's easy to get a sense of the direction and start narrowing down from those references where I'm more interested in going with the character. So one of the things that I became really interested in with this character, for example, was this idea of the sky goddess being made of feathers. I knew that I didn't want the feathers themselves to be actual feathers because that's time consuming, and I also just thought it would be interesting to represent them a little differently. So I started to come across these beautiful handmade paper sculptures by various artists, and this really became the basis for the direction of the textural landscape of the sky goddess. Once I have my broad selection of references ready and I'm happy with those, I start to make key selects from those collections and begin to narrow down the process of the direction of the concept. At this point, I'll be making notes for myself on which references I'm using for what, such as materials, textures, colour palettes, that kind of thing. And at this point in the design process, I find it's usually a good idea to start sharing that progress with the client. So in this case, I fed this back to the team at the Foundry to make sure they were happy with the progress, which they were. So I took these references and then made a 2D concept from that. I have a background in illustration and fine art, so for me, I'm just most comfortable developing concepts in a 2D sense. When I'm short on time, I tend to use photo bashing as a quick method to start developing a sense of what the character is going to look like. So after some back and forth, the final concept was signed off by the Foundry and it was time to move into modelling. As this talk is really about texturing and Mari, I'm not going to go into too much detail as the process for the model generation, but I would like to talk about how I created the paper feathers. I think it's quite an interesting technique and one of the large problem areas of the project where I needed to resolve which aspects of the feathers I was producing in the model, what I was doing in Sculpt, and whether or not I would create any of these feathers purely in texture. So I'll just go over this process. So I decided to use a technique in ZBrush to create the feathers called nanomesh, which effectively is the process of creating an individual model, making a nanomesh brush from that, and then essentially populating my underlying model per polygon with that nanomesh. It's quite a simple technique, but it's fairly effective and a quick way to get good coverage on your model. You can see here I'm just prepping my base mesh. So you want to take into account how many feathers you need as your number of polygons is equal to the number of individual meshes you're dropping on your model. So you can see here there's quite a few controls in the nanomesh toolkit which allow you to refine your nanomesh output. Then I'm just creating polygroups from that to allow me to play with each feather individually. I did end up using the groom tools as well to just add some organic movement and input to the feathers to make them feel less CG. And that's that. So this worked well for the larger feathers on the character's shoulders, but I needed a way to blend these feathers into the mesh itself as they faded away towards her torso. So for this technique, I created a VDM brush, which is a vector displacement brush, which again is just quite a simple process. I just needed a flat plane on which I then sculpted my individual feather, as you can see here. I made sure I had a good thickness and shape to the feather. You could create variations as well if you wanted to and have a range of these. I then use a duplication of the chisel brush, clear the brush and add my VDM mesh to that. And then it's a very simple process of being able to drop my mesh on the surface and quickly start to build up my feathers. This time I'm just showing you how you can use a morph target brush before you start sculpting your feathers. That way you can easily blend out your feathers as you need to on the go. One thing I would like to show you before moving on to Mari is the polypaint tools within ZBrush. I tend to do my first texture block out for my personal work only in ZBrush using the polypaint tools, just because it's a quick way to start visually developing a certain style or look for your textures and test things out really quickly on the fly, even as you're sculpting. You could also do this in Mari. It is good for concepting, but I wouldn't use this tool for production workflow textures. So there's a couple of useful tools that I tend to make use of. Firstly, the Mask by Cavity tool. I often use that to drive certain features within the cavities. Another feature I use a lot in the more recent updates to ZBrush is the Adjust Colors tool within the Polypaint palette. This allows you to mask certain specific features that you want to adjust. So that's a great way if you've got certain features that you've baked down into your texture, for example, that you just want to tweak a little bit, or it's not quite looking the way you want it to. I thought I'd share that process quickly just because it's a really useful little tool. Once I'm happy with my polypaint, I will export that and bring it straight into Mari and start transforming that into a proper production-ready texture workflow. So, all set up in Mari, I'm going to give you a brief overview of my node-based setup for the Sky Goddess textures. I typically use a material-based workflow for all of my texture work in Mari. Here you can see how I've constructed the textures per material so that I can have control over each material individually and output the final result as a combined multi-material set of maps. Here are my final output channels ready to be exported to an external renderer for look deving. One thing I often notice in texture artists who are just starting out is a tendency to prioritize the diffuse map in terms of texture work and leave many of the secondary maps with less detail. This is something I was guilty of myself also, and have learnt with time and also experience down the line in look dev that all maps together are equally important in the creation of believable and physically accurate materials. Here I'm just showing you some of my input map drivers generated from Polypaint in ZBrush, and also some utility maps. I used a largely procedural approach to creating much of the gold embellishments on the Sky Goddess asset. I often use procedural approaches in production because they are typically faster and non-destructive. Using the position map to extract masks in the X, Y and Z axis, for example, allows me an object-based mask approach which can potentially be transferred across multiple similar assets despite variation in UV layout. Mari is very powerful in this way as it allows for high-quality procedural and non-destructive workflows which are highly suited to the fast pace of film or TV production workflow. I next add some curvature-based masks and also some hand-painted bespoke masks. My final combined gold mask is then fed into my multi-material node graph setup above. Here I'm showing you inside one of the material subgraphs to illustrate how I then integrate various input map drivers and masks in order to construct my textures. The node graph in Mari is very easy to work with and allows me to organize my workflow efficiently and easily. One new feature in Mari 7.0 is the bakery. Guys, I was so excited to try this feature out and it did not disappoint. This is a major feature update by the Foundry and I'm so grateful for this as it's going to save texture artists a lot of time by avoiding the need to leave Mari to bake out utility maps. I'm going to walk you quickly through the process of creating bakes within Mari now, just to show you how efficient and easy the tool is. The bakery GUI is really clear and simple to use. You have your Bake To and Bake From panel, from which you can either pick meshes that exist within your current Mari object, or alternatively, you can import an external source mesh to use as your Bake From mesh. Next, add your desired bakers from the drop-down menu. Here you can edit your file settings as well as view the default bake settings per baker in the panel below. Once you've added your bakers, you can preview the current bake settings for each baker by hitting the play button in the top right of the GUI. Note that the viewer will show you a view of your model which corresponds to whatever view you have in your current camera view. With your baker preview loaded, you can then edit your bake settings and view the changes in action live. This is such a useful feature. As you can see here, it allows you to really fine-tune your settings in relation to your current asset needs. I love this tool and I will definitely be using it in my workflow going forward, as it is a huge time saver to be able to stay within Mari to create these bakes. A huge thank you to all the team at the Foundry for making this happen. Before I move on, I just want to show a last couple of nice features of the tool. Firstly, there is the option to save and load bake presets. This is super useful, both in production environments or even in teaching settings with student group projects, where multiple assets need to share the same workflow. Finally, you can see there are multiple ways to handle the bakes on output. I'm just creating geochannels from my bakes in this instance. What I liked was that the bakery automatically creates the geochannels and populates them with your bakes, so you don't have to manually set these up. One last feature within Mari I'd like to showcase here is, in my opinion, an underused yet super powerful tool, the Python console. The ability to script within Mari enables artists to build and customize tools to help them speed up or create a greater level of efficiency within their workflow. I more recently got into scripting within Mari and have been really enjoying building little tools such as this one, which enables me to append new HSV or tileable nodes to my node graph, merge them, and then automatically rename all the nodes based on the naming of the backdrop node. If you have some basic scripting knowledge but are interested in finding out more, a good start is to check out the Mari Python API documentation shown on screen right here, which can be accessed from within Mari via the Python drop-down menu under Documentation. In here, you can find commands and functions for anything you want to script within Mari. If you're completely new to Python scripting, I recommend you learn some basic Python first. If you have more of an artist background or training rather than tech, then definitely don't let that put you off. Though I did ultimately study scripting at university to a small degree, I really have an artist background. I used to think scripting was not for me due to this, but since picking it up, I've been surprised at how much I enjoy it. So give it a go, you may be surprised.
Okay, well, that was super interesting, and I love that there was such a vast array of information in there, both from the artist side and the technical side. I mean, just before we went live, obviously, Ellie and I were talking about our different backgrounds and how we went to the same university, but we came from very different courses in that sense, though both on animation. And Ellie, I have to say, I am somebody who has lost all of my Python knowledge and technical side, so it's fascinating to see that you've kept it in that way.
Oh, thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I've sort of recently got back into it again and really enjoying it at the minute. It's such a time saver.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you said it in the recording. It's scary as an artist, and that is something we hear not just from individuals. We hear that from studio artists as well. We hear that about things like the node graph. Now I'm going to kick off the questions by sneakily using that to transition into a node graph question. And then I will start picking some questions from the chat. Ellie, if you do want to pick questions yourself, please feel free as well, or just let me know which ones you'd like to answer. But yeah, I wanted to ask, given that you have a huge amount of experience in the industry, I imagine that you started learning Mari in layers. like we all do.
Yes, back in the day. Yeah.
Yes. How did you find the transition to node graph? When did you do that and why?
So interestingly, yeah, so I obviously worked with layers for a long time, and I was a little apprehensive, as a lot of people I think were, moving to the node graph. I actually began using the node graph in Substance Designer because that's just what's there. And then obviously once I started using it in Designer and seeing kind of the benefits of node graph workflow, then moving back into Mari and approaching the node graph in Mari felt really comfortable at that point. So it was a smooth transition for me. And I mean, everyone's different. I hear kind of people in the camp of like, I prefer layer workflow, and I hear a lot of people who are more node graph kind of comfortable wise. But for me, I just find my brain works better with the node graph. I don't know if it's because I've a very artist type brain, and I like to visualize things in front of me. And I struggle more in the layers that way.
Yeah, I had exactly the same experience. Obviously picking up Mari back when I was studying, coming in Mari, I want to say like 2.5 was the first one that I probably used, which was all layers based. And coming into the node graph was a scary moment when I was already working at Foundry and had been for a while when I decided to give it a go. But once you try it, it's so logical, and you're completely right. It's so much easier to visualize what you're doing in step by step versus getting lost in layers that are being shared across channels. It's especially when you see a node graph as pretty as the one that you sent, which makes me so happy.
Time on my colors.
Yeah,
I think we're visual people, right, as artists. So being able to see everything and parcel everything up into neat kind of visual boxes just works well for my brain, and I just find it easier that way. So very grateful for the node graph.
There is a question in the chat about the node graph, which is quite nicely timed. Derek is asking whether you can talk a little bit about your node graphs and your subgraphs and how you break them down. I know you showed it, but could you talk a little bit about that process and whether you have templates, anything like that?
Yeah, I guess so. Trying to think the best way to describe it. I use templates a lot, actually. Templates are great in industry. So anyone who doesn't know what a template is, it will be a kind of default setup that you have that you can save out and share between assets. So that's one great way to work if you've got multiple assets that need the same node graph setup, that kind of thing. So Mari's great for that. With the material-based workflow, you have your primary node graph, right? And then it's your kind of general workspace, or that's how I see it. And then you have your material graphs that are your subgraphs within that. And then within that, your channels are kind of going all the way through. So yeah, I don't know how else to explain that. So basically, I'm putting all my work per channel within that material. Is it Derek? Did you want to expand a little more on that question? What exactly you'd like me to speak about? Because I'm happy to expand on that a little more if there's something more specific you want me to talk about with that.
Yeah. In the meantime, shall we pick another question? Then we can always come back.
Sounds good.
So Keysign Phenomenon asked, what is the difference between specular and roughness?
Okay, yeah, good question. So specular data is kind of the amount of specular bounces that are coming off from light hitting your model. So it's the amount. And then you can also have color info in that, depending on what wavelengths of color spectrum of light the material is absorbing and what's throwing back out. So it's color and amount. And then your roughness is referring to, it's a kind of a textural way to describe the evenness of the surface. So how smooth or rough the surface is, and how the light might scatter more depending on how rough or smooth the surface is. So two separate things. Good question.
But two very important things. And I think We've mentioned it before in past YouTube lives, but it's always worth mentioning again. Texturing is a science. It is a study of real life, and the best way you can become a good texture artist is by learning that theory, as painful as it is. Obviously, Ellie, you can tell me I'm wrong because you have a lot more experience than I do.
Completely in agreement with you on that, Charlie. There is obviously a kind of mimicking physics in VFX, so it's really important to understand the physics of how light interacts with materials and do your background research on that. If you want to go into look dev or texture, then it's important to have a good understanding of those things.
Yes,
key, actually. It's difficult because as a texture artist, you need to be able to balance the two, because I think creating something physically accurate is really important, but at the same time it needs to feel right, and that is something that's more difficult to define, because you can make something that's technically there and physically accurate, but somehow it just doesn't hit the mark, especially with character work. And that's where your artistic training has to come in, and something that is difficult to define, more difficult to define and parcel up and to know how to develop, I think. So I always say for people getting into texturing as a career, if you have a tech background, that's brilliant, but on the side, maybe go do some art classes, some life drawing classes, that kind of thing. Even hand painting, like painting, is really good to do to understand the basics of light and color. Yeah, I can't stress that enough. It's a balance of the two, and sacrificing sometimes a bit of one to push the other can be more important. So yeah, it's an interesting one, that.
Yeah, completely agree. I think taking the time to go and observe the world around you, learn about different ways of looking at things and training that artistic eye is so valuable for artists of all levels in industry. No Plastic has asked, what about specular versus metalness? Which one is more preferable as a shader? Do you have a use case for each? Do you have one you prefer?
They're just different approaches. Yeah, you could go down the one route or the other, but you wouldn't use the two together. You'll see in my breakdown, I actually have both. I have a metal, and so you might have noticed that, but I actually didn't use the metal map as a metal map. I used it as masks, as a mask for my shader development post texturing.
Yeah, I always tend to work with metalness just because I'm lazy. I feel it's not the lazy way of doing it. It's just the easiest one to understand. It's white is metal, black is not. It's very simple.
It makes sense.
Whereas specular gets a lot more crazy, especially when you start bringing color into the mix.
And it really depends on the studio as well. So each studio will have its own approach, its own workflow. So again, yeah, it's part of the job is kind of working with whatever workflow the studio has.
Yeah, really acknowledging what final render you're going to need, all of the different maps that you need to pass on to look dev. Your background's falling apart.
I just noticed that.
Spooky. Let's see. So Ignacio asked, what made you transition from a background in fine arts and illustration to VFX texturing?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I still think it comes down to, I guess when I was younger, I saw myself more as an artist and didn't really ever consider doing kind of more mathsy, sciencey subjects. I don't know if that was just like, I know STEM subjects, we spoke about this earlier, Charlie, just not pushed in the past as much with girls. And yes. I think it's something I really believe in, that needs to happen more. I just didn't consider going down that route. I didn't think it would be for me. And so I went down the art route because I had these sort of skill sets and thought, well, we'll try that. And then one day when I was on my fine art course, I just walked past the games room and I saw these computers and I was like, oh, that is really interesting. And I walked in and the games teacher, who was lovely, saw me and said, oh, would you like to have a play? And I was like, oh, yes, please. And then it was Maya. And I was instantly hooked. I was like, oh, what is this world that I've just come across? And so I was kind of looking at different courses in the country. And then that was it. I just thought, right, I'll finish my fine art degree. And then I have to go back and start again because this world of visual effects looks so awesome. And so I did. I started again and then deliberately chose a course that was more technical because I knew I needed that balance. And I was very nervous and apprehensive about it. And actually now I love having the two skill sets, the tech side and the art side, super useful. So yeah, that's how.
I do think it's really valuable to have both. I lament the loss of my Python scripting knowledge, but at the same time, it gives me a lot of time to focus on the artist side. But yes, I think it's amazing to have both skills. It's only going to benefit you. And yeah, we were talking about it before the webinar started, and yeah, I completely had the same experience. I came from studying an art background as well, art, graphics, media, that sort of thing, and was getting very heavily pushed into, you should go into media, you'll do well in media. And I was like, but I want to do animation. So then everybody was kind of pushing me towards, like traditional animation, stop motion animation, which is awesome, looked absolutely awesome. But I remember seeing the course, not to name any universities, but happened to be the same one as Ellie.
Yeah. We only just found this out. So.
Yeah, we only found this out like 10 minutes before the but yes, I saw that and I just thought, wow, that's really amazing. I don't know if I'm going to be smart enough to get onto this. And it's quite an extensive interview process with a lot of different skills that are needed, including technical skills. But here we are. And I wouldn't change it for a world. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, fab career.
Mark,
so many questions.
Yes, I'm going to pick out Mark. Hi, Mark. Hope you're doing okay. He has mentioned a book that is on your desk.
Thank you for noticing. It's there for a reason.
Mark's asking, are there any other resources or concepts from the traditional art world that you find helpful in your digital work?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, for me, inspiration comes from all over the place. Books, films, comics, traditional artwork. I'm gonna hold it up because when I was teaching on the course I used to teach at, I always used to suggest to the students to
Such a good book.
Look at this. It's James Gurney's Colour and Light, and it's got so much theory in there. He's a traditional painter, but everything you could possibly want to know about how light interacts with materials. It's just the best reference ever. So I definitely recommend that book. Trying to think of others that I have. Yeah, it's very specific to each individual, right? I'm very inspired by movies. I work in movies, so I have like all my favorite films that inspire me. Trying to think.
Lovely Foundry helper in the background has just posted a lovely list that Ellie put together of books that she recommends.
You can see there's a couple of Dave McKean books there. I don't know if you guys are aware of his work. He's a comic book artist. That I just really like the way that he portrays characters, and he uses mixed media as well. So he's quite a fine art background himself. And I just like the way that he plays with materials. And so that's very similar to my own interest as a character artist. I'm interested in how the characters' surface can showcase who they are and what they represent through the textural work. So yeah, definitely recommend those books. Yeah. But I think the most important thing is to follow your interest. So don't do what you think is trendy, or think about what you appreciate in characters or in things around you and follow that, because that's how you'll develop a passion, right? And cultivate a passion. If you just do what you think people will want to see, then it's hard to keep that motivation up, right? So yes. I'm very selfish. I just do what I enjoy doing in my personal work. That's probably the best advice I can give.
My advice, just to add to that, would be really don't restrict yourself to looking at only artists. I think there is a wealth of inspiration and education that you can get from a range of different places. And that can be things like, there are books by, say, Hideo Kojima about his thought process that are super interesting. You could look at lots of different literature, like fictional, nonfiction, that sort of thing. Really, I think try and build up there's a theory, and I don't know if it is by Neil Gaiman, but I've heard it being spoken about by Neil Gaiman, called the compost heap theory, where you should just absorb everything you can, like, keep notes of things that inspire you, even if it's in a completely different area of industry or completely different topic to what you're working on, because all of that starts to add up and become like something that really helps you develop yourself.
Yeah, look broad and wide.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And everything. Do you want to pick a question? Because I've been picking them all.
Look, they've been great questions so far.
Some really awesome ones.
Oh, I like this one. When it comes to working on a big production, what would be one feature of Mari that you found is an absolute time saver or absolutely necessary for texturing process, especially if mesh is prone to changes? Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, one thing, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. One thing I like to do is find out, especially with characters, how I can create something that has an artistic vibe and feels strong artistically, but using procedural approaches. Mm-hmm. So when you're working in a production workflow, obviously time is of the essence, and you might need to make a lot of changes on the fly, and the model's going to change a lot on the fly. So by using procedural approach to do things, it allows you to have a non-destructive workflow. So the model can change and your maps and bakes and everything just need to update in a very simple way. So that is one of my current favorite things to figure out, problem solve, is like, okay, I want to create this very artistic looking approach to this character or this asset, but is there a way I can do this procedurally and make it feel like it's hand painted bespoke work, but it's done procedurally? And Mari is great for that, because you have a lot of procedural tools in there. So tilables, scattering nodes, the ability to use position maps and bakes and things like that all facilitate that. So that's why I'm a big fan of Mari in production workflow, because it enables me as an artist to be an artist, but to make it work for production. Yeah. I hope that answers that question a little bit.
And it gives a little shout out to Mari without me asking. Just awesome. Unplanned shout out. Yeah, go for it.
Having a look at, there's something on. Could you walk us through your process regarding masks? How much do you push them? In which order? How many details are you looking for? So I use masks constantly in my workflow. I will almost always use a mask rather than baking anything down into my channel maps, like my diffuse spec, etc., because again, that enables that non-destructive workflow where I just need to update the mask. And sometimes I have the same mask that's driving multiple channels, for example. So in a material, there might be a mask that's driving paint chips from one material to the metal behind or something like that. So yeah, I'm using masks a lot.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I feel like I almost exclusively paint on a mask. If I can get away with not hand painting something and I can just focus on, black and white in and out and, do everything else procedurally or as a material node, or like you said, having something reusable is so fundamental.
Definitely. Let's have a look at this one. Aaron, is this model a concept piece or is it ready to be animated? Hi, Aaron. We went to university together back in the day, so nice to see you here. So yeah, this is a concept piece. You couldn't, the base mesh is pretty animator friendly, apart from the fact it's just a torso. But it is, really a concept piece. And most of my personal work is designed just to be a standalone piece in itself. So in this particular case, it is a concept piece, but I've tried to make the texture workflow itself as I would do it in production. So everything that's going on in Mari is similar to how I would approach my work for any given studio.
What Ellie didn't mention in her breakdown was that when we reached out to her, the mood board we had already put together actually contained Ellie's work already because we loved it. So we were very happy that Ellie jumped on board with us.
That's really kind, Charlie. I appreciate that. Nice funny little characters.
They're always gorgeous and so ethereal, which I love. I love it.
It's always nice when, as an artist, you really hope that you're getting a reaction or some kind of response in someone when they look at your work. So that's really nice to know.
I think I've seen even, when we've shared around the Mari 7 release, when we were sharing breakdowns of your work, sharing your ArtStation page and showcasing the asset for the first time, I know I was getting messages with people being like, is that Ellie Dupont's work?
Oh,
yes. It's awesome that you have such a statement in your brand.
That's really kind. Thank you, Charlie. There's so many good questions here.
Yeah.
Chat answer this. So use your illusions. How much time do you invest in references research in a production environment? That's a great question. I am a huge fan of research. Like, as much time as I can invest in it, I will. If I can dedicate any amount of time at all, and we have the time for that in production, then I will. We often don't. I'm going to be really honest. In production timelines, there isn't a lot of time of the time, unless it's a really bespoke, long-term asset that needs ongoing work or something very specific that we're kind of being innovative with. Then in that case, then you have the time. You will be given a bit of time to R&D, and any time I get for that, then I use it, because for me the final product is always the result of the R&D that's gone into it. It's the most important part for me, is that planning and groundwork that goes into the development of an asset. So I always suggest to people, even in doing your own work and projects, to never just dive in. Spend a good amount of time, start broad. That's what I do. I'm a huge fan of Pinterest, because you get so much access to so many different things, and I'm a bit of a Pinterest fiend. You spend hours on that, and I just start big, and then I start honing down and narrowing, and that is that process of development of the idea or the design, and you just go from big and smaller and smaller and smaller, and hopefully you end up with your key, really high quality references that then start to drive that's in terms of the visuals, but then you also often need to R&D, how am I going to achieve this, right? So it's the problem solving or the tech aspect of that, right? These are my ideas, but how do I actually get from A to Z? Like, what tools am I going to use? What techniques am I going to use? And I might need to build a new tool for this approach, that kind of thing.
Do you find when you're in production that you get a lot of references specific to, say, like material types, or is that all research that you'd need to go do on your own based on like a concept that you get?
I think there's a general expectation with artists in the industry that you would know how to do that. For some assets, there will be concepts or references that you need to match. But aside from that, the materials themselves, you're expected to have a certain level of understanding of this is what a certain kind of metal will feel like, or this is what skin is like. And depending on the studio as well, they will have different levels of kind of tools and templates and things that they've set up for that studio that give you a base to work from, for example. That really depends on the studio, though.
There is a question from Sophia I want to ask, but I'm just going to quickly mention Scar asked whether using the bakery in Mari means that Mari is good enough for 0 to 100 in the texturing workflow now. Scar, I recommend you get a free trial of Mari. Try it out, see. It is definitely where we would love to be. So we are very eager for feedback, and yeah, we want Mari to be the only texturing tool you need. So keep watching this space because we've got plans. But
I'm going to say the bakery is a game changer for me. It's a game changer because if I don't have to go outside of Mari, that's just the win.
Exactly. And if anybody doesn't know, 7OV2 released recently, and it's got even faster. Didn't know that was possible, but it is because the Mari team are incredible. But yes, there's a great video by Peter Aveston, Mesh Studio on YouTube. If you want to see the comparison between 7OV2 and 7OV1, check it out. It's awesome. The question from Sophia: what are some common challenges you encounter as a texture artist when texturing, and how do you overcome them?
Oh, that's a good one. Let me have a think about that one. It could be one thing that happens from time to time is when you get a client who doesn't know what they want. That's always an interesting one. So when a client wants a certain look to something, but they don't know what it is, so we don't have a concept at that point. And we as a texture artist need to develop something from scratch and start showing ideas just to instigate some discussion on that. Personally, I love when I have that because it's a freedom for me to have my artistic voice in that. But it is a challenge, right? Because then instead of having a very clear brief or direction, then there's grey area there that needs back and forth. And your job is then to get there as soon as possible without using too much time guessing what the client wants. So it's also about reading the client's feedback. So listening to what the client has said, where they're enjoying your work and where you can start to think, okay, that's not something that they're interested in. So that's a challenge area.
And that's something that will come with time as well. Just experience of, getting feedback in dailies, getting client feedback and pushback all the time.
Absolutely, yeah. And learning from your colleagues as well. I'm always watching my colleagues work, what they submit for dailies and how they work, and trying to learn and grow from, and that's never stopped. It doesn't stop even as a senior. I still come across amazing artists every day, and I see their subs and I'm thinking, oh, wow, what a cool approach, right? That's going in the memory bank.
I think we've got time for one, maybe two more. Let's have a look at No Plastic asked, is there any trepidation for our jobs against AI and the threats to the industry? Topical.
I have to think really because it's such a political on this one. I think that AI has its value and its place, but it just needs to develop carefully and with the right systems in place. And it needs to be used in the right way. There are great ways to use AI. And as long as it's done ethically and responsibly, there's no reason why it can't be a benefit.
Yes. I absolutely feel the same. And I think it's important to know that, machine learning is not new. The ways that people are using generative AI specifically now are, booming into the forefront of everyone's day-to-day life, but it's been there for quite a long time. And I know at Foundry, when we are looking at the industry as a whole, when we're looking about how AI can be used, and especially in the Mari team, we are thinking, how can we empower artists? How can we focus on removing the manual tasks that they have to do, reduce those button clicks, and allow them to have more time to be creative? We're not thinking, can we go generate an entire texture for them and do the project? I think there is a lot of value that artists have that they don't realize AI can't replicate. And that is basically what Ellie has shown us here today, the thought process. AI can't go through that thought process and the logic and the research and thinking about why something is a specific way. That's why you get so many generated images of, things in weird places, people's heads pointing different directions, multiple hands. It can't, it's going to get better. It is. But it's never going to be able to replicate the thought process that an artist has. And that is the most important thing.
That's a good answer, Charlie.
I've been thinking about it a lot. Let's do one more. Well, maybe two more. We have a question for every character you try, for every character and concept you do you try to maintain the same workflow, or do you like to explore new ways with every piece?
That's a great question. Thank you for this one. Yes, and both. Yeah, there are certain things that I try to maintain and then develop. So my interest in skin as a material. I have a huge passion for skin. I just love it. It's really interesting. There's so many complex things that go on with light and skin in terms of how skin behaves as a material that I just find beautiful and fascinating. So that you'll see I'm exploring in pretty much all my personal work is skin and breaking up skin with other materials and playing with skin against other materials. So that and then I try and develop it. So I try and evolve it each time and create a nicer skin, if you like. And then I also go through phases of different interests that tend to come into my work. So I got really into fractals for a bit and I started playing with kind of these sort of fractal-like forms. And so then for me, it's just about playing as an artist and enjoying that opportunity, which we don't get always in production. So when I'm doing my own work, I just try to bring in my own interests where I can, because that's an opportunity to do that.
Did you find it difficult at all with this project to, not get sucked into the this is human, it should be skin mentality? Because it's quite a different texture that you've gone for.
Yeah, with this one, I decided I wanted to go much more artistic with it and just actually play with, do I push it away a little bit from skin, which I did in the end. It wasn't quite skin. And I kind of, I went away from physical, trying to replicate something physically as a real skin, if that makes sense, and went more down the artistic route with this one. Just because it kind of went that way, flow-wise.
It turned out gorgeous.
Thank you.
I love the different kinds of textures that you've got in there.
There's always things you would have liked to work on more. If I had more time, there's things I would have tweaked, but yeah, it is what it is, and I'm happy with it.
Yeah. I keep saying one more question, but we keep answering them, so maybe one more. Sophia has asked, could you share your perspective on the challenges and opportunities that women might encounter in the VFX industry?
Oh, that's a good question. It's something I feel really passionate about as well. I've done a couple of talks on this at university as well. and pulled some really interesting thoughts from women in the industry from that, about the glass ceiling. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, like why a lot of women get to a certain point in the industry and why it's hard to progress to like more senior roles and lead roles and that kind of thing. I just think it's very complex. It does start, in my view, and from the research that I've done, it starts young, because girls historically have not been pushed towards STEM subjects. So I do think that's where it starts. And there needs to be more people from industry go into schools, not universities, but right all the way down to schools, and say, hey, this is a career for everybody, and this could be for you. And sometimes that's role models. So women going in from industry and saying, look, here I am, I exist, you can do this, kind of thing. And I think another impact is, I mean, I'm a mother personally, and I do find that since becoming a mother, that's created just more complexity in terms of finding the right balance for me as a parent, with also really being passionate about my career and not wanting to compromise on either, because I'm quite stubborn. So sometimes it's not always clear where I need to go next with that, and that takes a lot of shuffling and figuring out what the best environment is, not only for me as an artist, but also for my child and my family as well. So protecting that. Yeah, I do think the best advice I can give is be strong in yourself, know your worth and your value, and fight for what you think is, I guess, you're right as a female artist, that you should be able to be a parent if you go down that route, and you should be able to have a career, and the two should be feasible. And if you're not being, if you don't feel that you're being treated right by a studio because of that, then there's always another studio.
Yeah,
that's always been my approach.
I feel very strongly about this as well. As you said, obviously Foundry is slightly adjacent to being in the VFX industry, but we are still a tech company, and as such, tech is, typically a male-dominated industry. And I would say that Foundry doesn't have like that many issues in this type of thing. We're very conscious about diversity and inclusion and making sure that everyone has equal opportunities. But sometimes there are situations when you want to progress that they are harder for a woman to express why she deserves something, say, versus someone else who may be male or male presenting, who feels that they can go further. You see that with job spec applications. It's quite typical for women to decide that if they don't meet all the criteria, to not apply for a job. My advice is evidence every single thing that you do. I am a big fan of having a spreadsheet of this is where I did this, this is where I did this. And if you see a job spec that you want, or you want a promotion, if you want to push for more responsibility, find out what those responsibilities are and push for them and show why you deserve it. I also, oh gosh, I had another thing I wanted to say about this and I've just immediately forgotten.
Could almost have it a separate talk for that. It's a whole
it's a big topic
discussion.
It's a big topic.
But great question, Sophia. Thank you for that.
Great question. And I think there are places that you can look to for more information on that sort of thing. I know Foundry partners with a great company called Chic and Code that do a lot of different topics and roundtables and discussions for people in all different industries in this sort of perspective. Yeah, I think we are coming up to the hour now. It is 6:59. I think we deserve a little bit of a break and a celebration for how well this has gone. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here today. And thank you very much, Ellie, for taking the time out, both to create this asset, because it's gorgeous. I'm obsessed with it. I'll never not be obsessed with it. And for taking the time to show up today. We will chat to you all soon. Bye.
Hi, and welcome to